Welcome to the Storyfield Podcast. This is Josh Allen, and I'm joined by my co-host, Micah Petrie. We both know that life is complex. We know that business is hard, and living a life of faith can really feel complicated. It is discouraging when movement in your life or business or faith has stopped. Well, you're in the right place to hear some great stories of normal people that are going to inspire you to take a step and move forward in life. So thank you for joining us. Today, you will be encouraged. Today is going to be a great interview because we have my friend Duke Revard. Duke is an Arkansas guy who played football for the University of Missouri in the Big 12 as a linebacker. Is that right, Duke?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And then he has his master's in theology from DTS. He is married, has 3 awesome daughters, and currently works as the executive director for Soma Family of Churches. So, Duke, welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's such an honor for us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Josh. Micah.
So, I want to back up to kind of a little bit of your childhood, build out a little bit of a timeline here. So, you grew up as an Arkansas man, is that right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
0 to 18 in Arkansas. So, born in Little Rock. My dad was in med school at the UAMS in Little Rock, and then lived in Bentonville, kind of home of Walmart for some years. Then my dad decided he wanted to be a different kind of doctor. So we went back to Little Rock and he did 3 more years. And then we went back to Bentonville to do that. And so, but 0 to 18 was in Arkansas. And that was home.
did you graduate high school in Bentonville?
Yeah, I graduated. So 6th grade through high school was Bentonville. So that kind of felt like some of the more formative years. And so I kind of think of Bentonville probably as hometown certainly more than Little Rock.
Yeah, it's like beautiful country up there. My grandpa ended up in Rogers, and we, loved it. Loved that whole side of the state.
Oh yeah, those were our rivals. So the Rogers Mountain Tigers have a deep-seated hatred for one another. So they used to. We had huge, like 4-story windows in our library. They would throw rocks through the windows in the library with like notes on the rocks, and we would die. I didn't do this personally, okay? Past the statute of limitations.
Yeah, you're safe.
Would dye white rats blue and let them go in their school, and there was a lot of hatred between those 2 schools. So
Wow, you guys are cutthroat.
That's back when high school was fun. You can't do that anymore.
You go to prison for that kind of stuff now.
Yeah. Right?
So I want to take a star and just ask about Walmart for a second. So you always hear it's from there. Like, was the whole town centered around that company, or did it employ everybody in the town? Like, what was its relationship with Bentonville?
Yeah, so I moved to Bentonville probably like 1984 or something, somewhere around then. And I would say just about everybody's parents worked for Walmart. There was even blue collar kids, like there was some big distribution centers there. And so their dad might load trucks at a distribution center all the way up to all the white collar. They call it the GO, the general office. My parents worked at the GO, and everybody knew exactly what you're talking about. It was other than restaurants and like my dad was a doctor, dentists, and a few other things, it was pretty much Walmart town.
Wow.
Everybody's
I've always wondered that.
Yeah. There were a couple like perks. One of them was the sample store where you could go and get like second stuff that was broken or damaged in shipping or something. And so all the employees could go to the second store. And then they had a really nice gym, the fitness center, Walmart Fitness Center. And so if you could get into the Walmart Fitness Center or you could go to the sample store, those were like 2 things kids talked about all the time because that was like our little town, So, but all Walmart people.
Yeah, I wondered that because I've heard Sam Walton, at least, he had a heart for his people and the culture and all that. So I was curious on how that seeped out into the town.
Yeah, I tell you what, it looks like a cheesy book, but Sam Walton's biography, Made in America, is actually a phenomenal book, like a leadership read. Like it's one of those things you look at on the shelf, maybe even in a Walmart, and go, oh, I don't know, that's probably not a great leadership book. It's a phenomenal book, and there's a lot there to mine as a leader. So anyway, he was a unique guy, but I grew up with his grandkids, so
wow.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time with them growing up.
Well, we can't argue with the success of the company, so it's going to be worth the read. We can make a note to that. So, at what point did you get into football, and then track us up to you playing in the Big 12.
Yeah, so my dad played for the Arkansas Razorbacks. He was all Southwest Conference in 1971. And so I grew up in Arkansas. Arkansas has no pro sports. They kind of care about basketball because we were good in the 90s, but for the most part, it's like Alabama and a lot of southern states. They care about college football and almost nothing else. And so the whole state is revolves around Razorback football. So I kind of just grew up in that culture. People knew who my dad was because he was all conference and at the time it's like 2 million people in the whole state. So everybody kind of,
they still knew the college football players for their state.
Oh, they knew the guys from 30 years back. I mean, everybody did. And so if they heard my last name, they would know who my dad was just based on that. So I grew up in that kind of environment. And so football was always a big deal for me. I happened to really enjoy it. I had some peewee football coaches that were just awesome. And I got the bug from them even really, really early. They made it really fun. And I started playing tackle football about 6th grade and played all the way, actually in Bidville when I moved there for the last time, and kind of played all the way through. And God gave me some opportunity to start as a linebacker in my sophomore year. I had a lot of success and just kind of kept doing that. And of course, high school sports is really fun because you end up playing with all your childhood friends. I mean, it's all your buddies all the time at every practice and every game and bus ride or whatever. So, it was always, fun and kind of my main focus through those years.
That's great. So, and then Missouri, I'm not sure, I'm not a into that world. So how did that work? Did they just call on you? They scouted you out and came and basically snagged you up and gave you a scholarship type of deal?
Yeah. So I wasn't a great high school, football player. I wasn't a great college football player, but it's kind of probably right on that bubble. And so I was recruited by some different schools, Kansas State and Missouri and Tulsa and Arkansas for a long time. But then Arkansas didn't end up offering me a scholarship. So I was kind of, honestly,
was your dad bummed out about that?
I was pretty bummed about that. My dad was cool about it, but I was pretty bummed about it. And so one of my high school teammates was a really, really good, like he was a better college prospect than I was as an offensive tackle. Missouri really wanted him. And then they saw me on tape a lot with him. And so they were like, hey, this guy should maybe be here too. And so, so I just really liked those guys. I like Kansas State. So Brent Venables and the Stoops brothers and all them were the defensive coaches at Kansas State those years. I used to talk to Brent Venables on the phone all the time. And I thought, I want to go to Kansas State because they were really like top 5 at the time, top 10, and were kind of pounding everybody. They didn't offer me either. So Arkansas and Kansas State were kind of my first two. They didn't offer me. Missouri, Tulsa, Oklahoma State, some others did, and I liked the staff at Missouri.
Yeah.
One of my high school teammates was going to go to Missouri. He really liked it. And so anyway, we ended up going up there together and we're roommates for the first couple of years and stuff.
And then who was the head coach at the time? Who'd you play under the whole time?
So I played, I redshirted. So I played 4 years with Larry Smith. And then the final year, Gary Pinkel came in my senior year.
Okay. So give us a behind the scenes from a D1, big school. That was a big conference, football player. What was it like playing in full-time academics? Did you ever have any free time at all? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I don't think people realize college athletics is probably a lot more like going to military school than it is just like having fun like a normal college kid. Now there are certainly people who do, they don't sleep, that's kind of what it would be is like, you don't sleep and you come back. But the cycle, especially the first couple of years, is like, they make you have all your classes before noon. So there's no like scheduling your classes to sleep in. I mean, you're getting up at, first class might be 7 a.m. And then all of them are done before noon. Then you're going over to the facility and then you're doing, if you're redshirted, you're doing full on weights the whole year. We call it gun club, 6 days a week, weightlifting before practice, and then watching film and then walkthroughs and getting taped and then going out and practicing 2.5 hours, immediately shower, go into the film room and watch practice film, then go into the dining hall and eat, and then go into mandatory study hall from like 7 to 9. So from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., you pretty much are scripted. And they check
Wow.
on your classes. So if you're skipping class and you're running and doing up downs and making your life miserable, so you kind of show up to every class, definitely show up to every meeting. If you show up to anything late, even 1 minute late, you show up to everything 5 to 10 minutes early, because you show up even 1 minute late, you're doing, up downs every 5 yards, back and forth for, 16 trips or something crazy. So they just drill into you, like you're where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, doing what you're supposed to do. And which is great in terms of building work ethic and discipline, accountability. But it's definitely like in the dorms, and at the time, I think they banned or got rid of the idea of athletic dorms. So you're in the dorms with all kinds of kids, right? Not just athletes. So we definitely had athletes on our floor and football players on our floor, but then we were mixed in with journalism school kids and whoever. Well, they're staying up. This is back in like the Nintendo 64. They're playing Bond until 3 a.m. every night. They're playing Mario Kart. They're screwing around. This is like Napster, right?
I remember.
I'm like putting myself right on the pop culture map.
Yeah. Yep.
They're downloading all this music from Napster all night. They're playing it loud or whatever. And so we're like pissed off because we know we got to get out and sleep. And we're just trying to get some sleep because we're exhausted from what I just described. So and again, I was a guy that was like, I'd rather sleep than party, or do something and stay up late. I mean, I want to do well in football. I'm trying to, I want to start, I want to play. I don't want to, screw around and be exhausted and all that. So anyway, so that was a lot of college. I mean, there were certain windows when you had a little bit of freedom and guys would really take advantage of it. And like I said, there were guys who partied all night with that schedule being what it was, right? And they just did, like they didn't care. So and they're young and bounce back and all that. But I was not that guy. I was get to bed, try to get to sleep, and do it again.
So my favorite memory of the old Southwest Conference, and since you were a linebacker, right? Did you have the mohawk and had the stuff underneath, the old Brian Bosworth? Were you that guy?
So I never did that, but I definitely love Brian Bosworth. So he was, he was big, wasn't he? Wasn't he at OU?
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely watched the Bos growing up, and he was unavoidable. Like in terms of like everybody was trying to be like him. I don't think I could talk my parents into the mohawk, so I never got that. Definitely didn't have the bleached blonde hair, but he kind of put the linebacker position front and center for a lot of people who weren't used to seeing a personality get any kind of attention. But I love the Boss. He was awesome. Although I remember my dad telling me stories about him that he had read different places, and he's like, he was, not the nicest guy.
Oh no, he was not. That's just what I think when I think like big gritty linebacker guys. That's my first image.
Yeah. I'll tell you the guy that was for me in high school, and it was Andy Katzenmeyer at Ohio State. He was kind of that huge guy. I don't know if you guys remember him. I think he finished like 4th or 5th in the Heisman. He was just killing people around 95, 96. Anyway, he was there closer to when I was playing. But yeah, the Boz early on was definitely awesome.
So what was it like? Like, what was the biggest? Do you remember a particular biggest crowd that you played in front of, and what was it like playing in front of all those people?
Yeah, we played. So the stadiums keep getting bigger. We played at Ohio State. They had, at the time was 93,000, I think. Now they're over 100.
Wow.
We played at Clemson. We played at Nebraska. At certainly UT and A&M. I'll say this about fan bases, like the Horseshoe at Columbus, Ohio State. Very loud, a lot of people, but very reactive fan base. So if they score a touchdown, they all yell for like 3 seconds, and then it's quiet again. I'd say the two best fan bases were Nebraska and A&M, like far and away. Nebraska people are crazy. I mean, they are so in a good way, like such good quality fans. And A&M is the loudest, the longest. They just never shut up the whole time.
Yeah.
They expend the most energy throughout the whole game. It's just like they don't ever stop, and they don't sit down, and they're just, the probably the best fan base. And I know if you're not an A&M guy, I know you're a Tech guy. You're like, I don't want to.
Man. Did you get hit by a tortilla ever?
But
I'm not defending. We're a pretty tough crowd.
Yeah.
Not in a good way, I don't think.
Oh yeah, I had experiences at Tech. We got cussed out by some good old boy on like the walkthrough on Friday night. He was like, there was like 3 guys up there on the chain link fence, just like lighting us up, and some Tech fan was letting us have it. We were getting off the bus. So yeah, but I would say man, that Nebraska and A&M are pretty special when it comes to just atmosphere, environment.
And you can hear on the field. I mean, it's just loud on the field too, and just wow. So, how many people have you knocked out?
Like I said, I was not I probably peaked in like middle school and junior high in terms of like killing people on the football field. I mean, I had some hits in high school that were great. College, I don't think anybody would say I knocked anybody out of college. I mean, you're talking about guys that are, going on to play NFL and other places, and they've been hit harder by a lot of other people. So, I probably peaked around middle school. I remember some kids come to school and be like, "Hey, you broke my collarbone in the game this weekend." I'd be like, "Oh, okay." I didn't
Sorry.
know that, but it would be, that was probably like 7th grade was maybe my fiercest peak. A couple times in high school,
Okay.
somebody got smoked, but I wasn't a world beater by any means.
Yeah. Well, so from there you graduated with a financial management, and then you went on to DTS. So kind of walk us through that, and then we'll get to current.
Yeah. No, so we talk about ministry. I, by God's grace, grew up in a family that I was really in some really, I would say, solid, faithful churches growing up. And then my last 2 years of high school, had a youth pastor who really poured into me, spent a lot of time discipling me and some of my friends. And so that was really foundational. By the time I trusted Christ probably 7, really started to, I think, pursue the Lord on my own, independent of my parents, independent of anybody else kind of inviting me to, around 16, 17. And those last 2 years were formative. So when I go to college, I'm walking with Jesus, like I said, independent of my parents. So I get involved in things, but pretty quickly I found at Mizzou, there wasn't a lot of Christian ministry to athletes. In fact, I would say there was nothing that was formal. And I was used to the University of Arkansas that had like all these ministries to athletes, and there was all this infrastructure. I get up there, there's none of that. And so anyway, the faculty advisor, a guy named Brian Maggard, was like, "Hey, we used to have FCA here. It has to be student led. The student who led it graduated. Nobody else picked it up. We haven't had it for 2 years." He got me and 4 or 5 other Christians in a room. It's like, who's going to lead it? And all these other guys were juniors and seniors, mostly track athletes. And I'm like, y'all are juniors and seniors. One of you needs to grab this. I'm a true freshman. And none of them grabbed it. It was awkward. He kept asking for like 45 minutes. And finally, I'm like, okay, these guys aren't going to do it. I guess I'll lead it. So I started leading FCA as a true freshman and had no idea what I was doing. But I really did, through all of college, lead, athletes just in kind of small group discipleship. And eventually it kind of grew into kind of having like 70 or 80 athletes on a Tuesday night, just kind of more like a sermon. And then we kind of smaller group times too. And so I just really enjoyed, honestly, just discipleship and pouring into guys and gals. Honestly, we probably had more, female track athletes than anything. And then you had some football players, some basketball, you had some of everything, but yeah. So I got really, I think, gave me a heart and desire to pour into people that way. And so long story short, my grandfather, my senior year of college, said, "Hey, are you looking at seminaries? I know you're leaving college." And he knew I kind of had a ministry heart and stuff. And I was like, "No, I'm not looking at seminary at all." And he was like, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Well, I feel like it's just credentialing. I don't think you really need credentials. I don't think Jesus' disciples had any credentials. I think it's probably just like a hoop you got to jump through for certain people with ministry, but I don't think you need it." And he's like, "Oh, that's an interesting take." He's like, "I went to Fuller Seminary in the 50s. He's like, the stuff I learned, I used every day in my personal Bible study. I used every day in my ministry. It was actually amazing." And I was actually shocked to hear him say that. I was like, "You got something out of seminary? That's weird." And so I had this bias. I don't even know where I picked up that bias. But at any rate, he kind of opened me up a little bit to at least consider it. And then I kept watching guys, and you guys probably know about Tommy Nelson's Young Guns program. Some of the guys that had discipled me had gone to Denton, done Young Guns. They would do it for a year, and then they would all go to seminary. So I was like, what's the deal? Like, these guys that want to be trained, they go didn't Bible, they get trained for a year, but then they end up going to seminary anyway. Maybe I'll just skip a step, because I was thinking about maybe going down to Denton, doing that. And I'm like, maybe I'll just, like I said, skip a step and go right in. And if that's where they're all kind of ending up anyway. And these are mentors and friends and people that I was just close to. And so anyway, just decided to visit some seminaries, went up to Chicago to visit Trinity Evangelical, got on the phone with pastors I trusted, asked about different seminaries. Then ended up going to visit Dallas Seminary, staying with a friend. And it was one of those weird deals. But my trip to Chicago was miserable. My trip to Dallas was like euphoric, and I was like, I don't know, I just kind of want to go to Dallas. So
I just have a lot more peace about it up here.
Yeah. So I ended up going to Dallas Seminary. This is around 2002 or so.
Now, is that a 3-year program, 4-year program, 2-year? How does that? Yeah,
most seminaries have an MDiv, which is a 3-year, and Dallas really forces you into a 4-year THM, and so they add a lot of language stuff, and they kind of try to push it towards a 4-year. So I did a 4-year THM.
And then that's in pastoral ministries, evangelism, and discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. Would give us a 5-minute overview of that, if you can, like that experience. I have not really just questioned or talked to anybody who's, been through that, about that experience. How was it?
I think it was good. I mean, there's certain things the seminary is really good at, and there's certain things the seminary is really not good at. I think if I were advising someone how to think about it, I would think about seminary. I would take the professor, not the course, because you could take a subject that you think is going to be great, but if the actual professor's not great, I mean, I hate to say that, it's kind of a dud. And if you get the right professors, even if they're talking about something you didn't previously know much about, it's going to be awesome. So, for instance, John Hanna for me was the guy at DTS, church historian, and he did a class on Jonathan Edwards. I didn't know a lot about Jonathan Edwards, but it's like John Hanna's teaching it. I've already had him a couple times. He's amazing. I'm just going to learn. I just want to get more time with him. And I would say that in general, like one thing you can't get anywhere else is probably things like church history. That's hard to get elsewhere. Seminary is really good at that. Ministry practice, seminary is pretty bad at. So the more practical the class is posturing itself to be, probably the worse it's going to be. I know that sounds bad, but you really have to learn ministry by doing. You have to learn it out in the world with real people. The classes are usually very, very dated and not helpful for the most part. I know that would be a discouragement to some people, but it's been a long time critique, and it's more or less true. But I think it's because you're trying to hit the head to train the hands, and the hands learn by doing. You learn in true apprenticeship. You learn in the real world. You don't learn but here to train your hands. I mean, and so it's just a failure to acknowledge like how people are formed and how people are trained. But I had a good experience. I probably learned as much from fellow students as I did from professors. They're a little closer to your level. So sometimes I'd be going to lunch with a friend of mine, like Nathan Wagnon, and he'd be explaining something the professor was talking about. I'd be like, what was he doing there? And he had been to Bible college before seminary, and he was more conversant than I was. And so able to like bring stuff down a couple levels, talk through that. But I think it's good. I don't regret going. They push you way harder to read way more than you would ever read on your own in that period of time. They force you to write way more than you would ever write. So it's kind of an accelerant in terms of exposure. You know what I mean? And knowing where the resources are when you need them. You know what I mean? If you need to go back to something, you know where to go back to. And then I would say I probably retained more than I would have imagined at the time, because it's kind of a fire hydrant scenario. And then at times someone asks a question or something comes up, and somehow something I haven't thought about in a long, long time comes back that somehow went in at that time. But yeah, I think seminary's got its place. Anyway, I could say more about different pieces.
Well, let me ask you this. So if there's somebody who's deciding like, do I need to go or not necessarily right out of school. I mean, just like, hey, I feel like I should go or not, like help them have speak into that a little bit on like, help them make that decision a little more clear from somebody who's been on the other side of it.
Yeah. I think I would want to know what they're wanting to do, like what's their vocation, what's their aspiration, what's the thing that they feel God's called them to do. And then, based on that, I mean, I think, a seminary may be a really good choice. I probably want to know a little bit about, their personal spiritual life, want to know a little bit about their personal ministry experience and where they've already been and done. Because sometimes you get a lot of guys in seminary who are just engineers. They've literally come out of engineering schools. They just want to figure out God and figure out the Bible. Like, that's why they're there. And you see a bunch of those guys and you're like, I'm not sure. And maybe they need that. Maybe that's their process and they really have to get under the hood and look at how stuff works. But you don't get the sense that they're going to then go and necessarily be fruitful in ministry, which is fine. And there's probably a need for academic track guys. 5% of the folks should probably just do academic track and really go really, really deep. But if someone's trying, to be a leader in the church, they want to be a pastor, a church planter, they want to be effective in discipleship, I'd be listening for that and kind of what they're trying to do. And there's now quite a few, church-based theological education opportunities as well. And some of those can be really helpful. They can even, I mentioned Tommy Nelson's Young Guns, is like something that's church-based in ministry can be a good, almost like pretest or precursor to see, hey, why don't you try this on for a little bit? Why don't you pursue it and see if there's more there that you want to go and pursue? And so those would be some of the things I would look at. If someone's going to do a lot of preaching and they imagine that they will be preaching and teaching the word maybe forever, I do think there's some exegetical skill of learning to really draw out of a passage what's happening in the original context, in the original language, with a lot of skill and precision that the seminary, it's hard to learn that, a lot of other places. You can be self-taught in this day and age very, very easily, but you got to know what resources to curate, and you got to push yourself to actually spend the time. And it can be done, but a lot of people would maybe spend time on the wrong things or not be disciplined enough to push themselves as hard as what you would get with that kind of accountability. And so, for someone who feels they'll be preaching and teaching, I think it is an accelerant,
That's good, Duke. That's really good. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So now, as part of Soma, so you're the executive director of the Soma churches. Give us a little bit of history on little background on what your role is currently, and tell us about Soma.
Yeah. So Soma started as one church in Tacoma, Washington, called Soma Communities. And it was a sub-affinity. Actually, initially, I would say it was just an Acts 29 church in the Pacific Northwest. The uniqueness was Soma means body in Greek. So it's just the body of Christ, which the emphasis is on, we are the church, we don't go to church. So that's, we don't clock in and clock out on Sunday morning, or when we're in this building, we're the church. All of a sudden, when we leave the building, we're kind of whoever we are. So the big emphasis on the priesthood of the believer. Every believer is sent into the everyday stuff of life to make disciples. So lawyers like Josh Allen are the church. Like, you're not less important than the pastor. In fact, the pastor's job is to equip you for ministry in all of life through your vocation, through your neighborhood, with your family, and so that really matters. Huge emphasis on that, and an emphasis on missional communities. So not just that individuals in a really hyper individualistic view of mission, but what would it look like to be on mission together. We see Jesus send out disciples in pairs. We see Paul always referencing ministry associates as he's going out for the most part, Barnabas or whoever's with him. So there's something about what Newbegin calls the communal apologetic of the gospel. Our relationship with one another tells a story about the gospel that us by ourselves in isolation can't tell. So our love for one another, Jesus says, you'll know you're my disciples by your love for one another. The love is the final apologetic of the gospel. They say that, they'll know that the Father sent the Son. This is Jesus's prayer in John 17. They'll know that the Father sent the Son by your unity. There's things that get communicated in community that an isolated Christian on an airplane can't quite display. They can get the message of the gospel out, but they can't really display the impact the gospel's had on their community and their life together. And that's the church. Jesus has the church as the visible manifestation of what he's doing in the world and how he's changing people and changing community and advancing kingdom. So so Soma's all about mission communities. That's why a church planter would plant with us, is because they really are about mobilizing the church for making disciples in the everyday stuff of life. That would be a really normal emphasis there.
Does Soma have like I don't want to use the word programs because I hate that word, but is it through small groups? Is it through classes you can take through the church to where you can kind of learn more how to do this?
Yeah. So one thing that happened, so that Soma Tacoma was unique enough but a lot of people wanted to come up and just observe what they were doing. And so they started a thing, and so they always had people visiting their church all the time. And eventually it's like, man, we can't always have guests because we actually have to do our job too, right? So they started this thing called Soma School, which was a 7-day immersion 3 times a year where you would come and live in homes with Christians who were on mission. And then during the day, you would whiteboard the gospel, power, and purpose. Like the gospel saves the individual, but it's really the purpose of God for all of creation. A gospel identity that we're a new creation. What does the gospel form us to be? A family of missionary servants, saints, beloved. Like we really start to teach who you are in light of the work of Christ. And then you get into how do we live in light of who God is, what God's done, who's made us, identity. Now that we understand all that, now let's talk about practice. Let's talk about what it looks like to be faithful in the places where God's sending us, in the real stuff of life with people, finding rhythms, trying to line up with the rhythms of the culture so that you're not just, it's not really a program. It's like really trying to figure out, how do I go with the grain of my culture so that I can really spend time with people, so that I can display the gospel, share the gospel, be a blessing, serve, love the people I'm with. So it's almost like letting the culture really shape the program, so to speak, versus like superimposing the program on the culture and be like, hey, you guys got to come to our thing, and it's on Tuesday night, and you got to leave what you're doing, you got to come to our thing. It's like, where are you already at, and what's already happening, and how can I join you in that with gospel intentionality with my community to both display and proclaim the gospel, and to love you and to serve you and to invite you into our community and our life together and that kind of thing. Well, 1,600 leaders have now been through Soma School. So they've come and done 7 days in that kind of a thing. Eventually we changed it to a 4-day experience because it takes a lot with travel to get 7 days off from work. That's like 9 days with travel of like taking your vacation days for the year, like to be a part of this training. A lot of church planners did it though, all over the world. We had a guy that had international ministry experience, and he brought a ton of people in from Eastern Europe in particular, but really Australia and all over. And then a lot of church planners went through that experience. And so that was the first training. And then once guys, I mean, I could go all the way through the history, but once they experienced that and they went out and started doing it, they had new questions. And we started this thing called Soma 201, which was like for practitioners who are actually now on the ground doing this. They have new and more advanced questions. And then eventually we started saturatetheworld.com, which was really just like a resourcing engine for gospel fluency. How does the gospel apply to all of life? And for what I would say, like everyday life as a church on mission together, and resources that really do mobilize the church for everyday life on mission. So we started that. We do a lot of things. Honestly, we do live trainings. We have regional residencies for church planters. I mentioned church-based theological education. Some of our cities have a solid infrastructure for that. We've got leader health initiatives that really pastor pastors. So there's a lot of infrastructure now to develop people, either if a part of the Soma family, or if someone says, hey, I'm already a part of another group, but I still like what you're doing. Could we be influenced in some way? Then Saturate the World is really a great resource for anyone and everyone to come and get what they need and that kind of thing. So yeah.
And that is so awesome, especially since it's, somewhat free so I think sometimes we get bottled up in our little silos of this is my church or my denomination does it this way, instead of remembering that we're all just really big church people.
Absolutely. That saturates heart. In fact, one of the things we're really trying to do is to build hubs in key cities that get after owning the lostness of the city together with every church in that city. So the first hub that we have established is in our origin, which is Seattle, Tacoma. It's called Saturate the Sound. And I think there's like maybe 150 to 200 churches that are building shared infrastructure together for prayer, disciple making strategies. Actually, let me tell you, leader health, church planning, and the common good, which is kind of like justice ministry, feeding the hungry, all that. And they do it together. And so it's not like, hey, my church is competing with your church, or my church, our thing is better than your thing. It's like, hey, let's build our thing together with everybody who's, can affirm the Apostles' Creed, right? You got to be Christian. We're not going to build with the Unitarians. We're not going to build with the Mormons. Honestly, we're going to, but if you're Orthodox, if you're Christian, we're going to be unified enough that we can do a lot of this work together and be okay with the unity and diversity, that you're not going to see baptism exactly like I do. That's fine. Our city needs Jesus. Let's get out there and own that together. So we're really trying to work towards that, Michael, that unity of, hey, it's not our thing. And honestly, We talk about no logos, no egos. Like, hey, let's not make it like, hey, will you come help us with our thing? It's like, hey, let's build a thing together. What do you guys want to call it? And do it in collaboration, and not, in any kind of imperialistic kind of
And
mindset.
that's so encouraging to hear. I mean, that is how I think probably the biblical example is when we're unified, building something, getting involved in the communities and not in our own, like Michael was saying, our own little silos and isolated. But so somebody wanting to go from zero, like I'm not really doing anything like as a missional kind of person to a step or
Mm-hmm.
two, like what would you recommend?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do? How do I do that? I want to take a step in this because that's good. It sounds good. I'm the church. How do I do that?
There's a step that we might not always think about that I see everybody take when they walk deeper into this, and I would call it the inspiration step. I know we're Protestants over here, evangelicals, but the Catholics have a practice of having exemplars, and they look at saints, and I don't think the saint. I think all Christians are saints. I think anyone
Mm,
who's in Christ is now holy because of the work of Christ. We're all saints, but there is something about having an exemplar, somebody who's a little further along than you, that you say, you know what, they inspire me. You know what I mean? Like the way that they've lived their life is inspiring to me. And so sometimes I'll survey all the people that are the most invested in the work with us, and I'll ask them their story. And there's always this movement from kind of ignorance or apathy to inspiration. And I don't think we can minimize that. That inspiration matters, that somebody getting this like fire of like, oh my gosh, there's more, you know what I mean? And I see in some people who are leveraging their life more than I am. Like I'm sitting in a pew and I'm logging a church service and I know there's more. And then I see these other people who are showing me that there's more, and I'm inspired. So that I think we have to say there's an inspiration step. And then from the inspiration step, there's usually an equipping step of like, hey,
mm,
or I'm inspired, but I still don't know how to do it. And it's still really foreign to me. And so how do I get equipped to walk into greater fruitfulness? And then I think there's an invested or ownership phase where it's like, you know what? Now I'm leading others in this. And I'm like, I got skin in the game. I'm giving my time, my talent, and treasure. I'm leveraged to see this happen. And now maybe even able to be an exemplar for some others who can be inspired, right?
mm,
And they enter into that funnel. And so that's typically how it goes. There's a lot of Christians who sit in the pew, who know they're not leveraged. Even you guys, I mean, business leaders like you, Josh, and you are leveraged, right? I know your life. I've been with you.
mm,
There lots of different contexts, but there's some other Christian lawyers who are being asked to like serve once a month in the children's ministry, and they're going, man, I think I've got more to offer. I'm happy to help the program sort of do its thing, and I want to be a team player, and I want to be submitted to my elders, but gosh, I can't help but think maybe there's a higher leverage thing I could be doing for the kingdom,
yeah,
right? And I've seen lawyers go in and on the common good, like do pro bono work to help people who are being mistreated by, in the slums, like slumlord landlords that are
yeah,
taking advantage of them. And I'm like, no, I'll do justice ministry through my vocation, and that's not okay. And I know what the law says in the state about the rights of a tenant, and I'm going to go to bat for these poor people that don't even know the law and have no idea, and so that's why they're being taken advantage. So they're saying like I can use my vocation in justice ministry in really leveraged ways, but it's way broader than that. But I'm just using an example of a vocation that gets off the shelf, and my passion is okay. So first, my presupposition is we've got tons of latent potential sitting on the shelf in the church, tons of unused, untapped, latent potential. And we've got to find a way to get people off the shelf, out of the boredom, honestly, of sitting in the pew into the kingdom of God. And Josh, I do think you're, and I'm just getting to know you, Micah,
yeah,
but Josh, I do think you're an example. I do think you're an exemplar for a business leader, a lawyer, to say, hey guys, there's a lot more than pew sitting. There's like a life out here with Jesus on the edge in the kingdom, and you can do it because I'm doing it too. And I got a job, and I still got my responsibilities, still got a family, still got all this stuff, but there's a way to leverage your life. And I think we need everybody to be following in that, and we need the whole church activated.
yeah. Thank you. So for the equipping step, as far as all the resources Soma has, do you think a good place to really start poking around and looking at and reading and learning from is Saturate the World?
I think it is. And we start with who Jesus is. We start with the gospel, even with pastors. So sometimes pastors want to get to the pragmatics and the how-tos. And when they come to Soma School, we spend about 6 days on the gospel. And the last day we do how to lead and form missional communities, which was the whole reason they came to the training, was that the pragmatic how-to. And we live in a pretty pragmatic culture. Like, teach me how to do it. But they want to do activity devoid of a deep understanding of who Jesus is and how he's formed us in the gospel, and that we are the church. And it isn't technique. Okay. So nothing that we do on a technique side is a silver bullet, but people want you to create a silver bullet for them, right? We don't do it. We really wreck them with the gospel. We spend a lot of time going after their heart with the gospel. And pastors are crying at these trainings. They're getting wrecked again by the gospel. We're always going to start with Jesus, his work. Then we're going to get Christology, gospel. Then we're going to get into ecclesiology. Like, what is the church actually? Who are you in the church? What's God doing in the world? And then we're going to get to practice, missiology, other things of like, hey, what does it mean to live this out faithfully, practically? And again, that's what everybody wants to start with, but we won't do it. And so I would say, if I was getting with a group of people, it's not a redundant to really build on a gospel foundation and not assume anything. I mean, we've seen pastors come to Christ at our trainings, seminary trained pastors that come up and tell you they've come to Christ and that they never actually trusted in Christ. They knew the verses. They could have repeated Ephesians 2:8-9 or John 3:16. They could have said some stuff about the gospel, but they realized they weren't actually Christian. And so that should never be assumed. And so part of equipping is gospel fluency. It's real gospel, laying gospel foundations, laying some, I know it's a big word, ecclesiological foundations, but who are the people of God? Because if you ever convince a people that they are something, that getting them to do something aligned with that identity is easy. So for instance, the church is family. We would teach that and really drive it in. In Paul's 13 letters, 277 familial references. So brother's the most used term for a Christian, 139 times. You've got inheritance language. You've got God as Father. All that metaphor is familial, okay? So familial language, the church is family. All the one another verses in the New Testament are really a good family. Bear one another's burdens. Pray for one another. Be, deferred, submit to one another. Be kind to one another. All those things are really, you're just describing a good family. So we teach, okay, the church is family. If the church ever really gets there from a gospel, knows in the book, Bible, like over and over, seeing it and going, and then becoming convinced, oh my gosh, the church is family. We'll stop treating the church like a gym membership. Like I could just leave 24-hour fitness and go down to Gold's Gym because, it's just a service provider. I'm just here to get something and get filled up and then go do my thing. It's like, no. Like, that's your family. When Paul's leaving the churches in Acts, he's crying and they're crying. You know what I mean? If you're leaving a church and no one's crying, like, you probably have not experienced the church, not as God intends it. And it's probably not a church's family. And so there's something fundamentally broken. But if you can get people to understand that they are family and be convinced from the gospel that it's what Christ has created them to be in Christ Jesus, now getting them to act like family is easy. And it's no longer like twisting arms and like, man, you should really be more sacrificial in serving the people in our church. It's like, that sucks. When you start from over there and it's just like shaming Christians into doing more, and that the motivation is like shame and you're not doing enough and guilt and, man, you really should be a better Christian. That's actually bad news. That's religion, right? That's like, if you would do more, you would be more. And the gospel is God's done. You already are. Now, in light of all that good news, go and do, right? And live out of that's the flow of the gospel. The imperative, the indicative before the imperative. And so anyway, I just think we don't do enough time forming people and who they actually are. We want to race to what we're going to do. We want to race to technique or silver bullets or practices. And honestly, people, that's what they want too. That's why they go to conferences all eager, trying to look for the next silver bullet. And it's like, we just blow all that up and start with the gospel, build on gospel foundations, go slow, go after their hearts. Like, why are you here? Why do you want your church to grow? You know what I mean? Is that about you? Is it like a narcissistic hero's journey, or is it about Jesus? Like, why are you here? We want to get after that and start from the right place and build on those foundations.
All right, Josh. So when are we signing up and when are we going to go?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to talk to Duke now.
He's got me fired up. I want to
I
go take a
know.
week off now and go do this whole thing because
I know. Well, you know what's cool? Like, I appreciate you saying that because to me, the first step, I mean, if we're talking like the practical stuff, really the first step is the identity stuff. Like, who are you? Like, you kind of uncovered a whole layer that's kind of a misbelief. I think for a lot of people, even for me, that just the confusion of, man, that is, you're right. You're exactly right. How encouraging to know the first step is the gospel and who you are and your identity, and the rest of it will flow from there. So I appreciate that, Duke. That was really good.
If you get that and you really establish that, you get everything else. If you start with just human behaviors, Christian behaviors, do's and don'ts, man, you might even get some activity, but man, the culture and what it feels like to be a part of it it's not a good news culture, man. It's usually a religious culture. There's winners and losers. There's people who are really good at the Christian thing, and they're kind of like the good people, and there's people who kind of suck at it, and they're kind of the bad people. And so there's pride and insecurity, and it's just the whole culture is backwards when you start with human doing instead of who is our God actually, and what has he done, and who are we in light of his word. It feels totally different, and it takes some time, and it takes some undoing and some rewiring and some reforming of thoughts about God and thoughts about the gospel and thoughts about ourselves that are broken. But all of us have broken folk theology and ways we see God and ourselves that are just not true. Even though we've read in the Bible something contrary, which it still feels pretty true to be living out of shame or living out of some other story.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Duke. So, you work a lot with ministry leaders. I mean, that's one of your big roles is the church plants. Is that correct? So tell us a little bit about that, and then how do we, from anybody listening, encourage our leaders? What do they need? How can we help them?
Yeah, two things. Leadership development works, and we don't do near enough of it.
Okay.
That would be like one of my big macro statements. Leadership development totally works. People can develop and grow, and most of the time we're getting work out of people rather than investing in them. And so it's really a short-term, anxious, visionless endeavor, because we never can slow down. It'd be like imagine that the tech industry had no research and development. It was always the management of the status quo. You would have no innovation. You would have nothing that ever breaks in that's new. You would always we'd still be doing like rotary telephones, because we'd say, well, let's just making a better rotary telephone because we just got to make it a little bit better this year, versus like, hey, no, let's think about the future. What are we going to need in the future? And in ministry with people, it isn't mechanical, like developing software or hardware. It's developing people. And it's a lot more like parenting than anything else. And this with parent, when you see a really mature kid that's like mature beyond their age, what implicitly is somebody took time. Dad, mom, grandpa, youth pastor, somebody took time, because this 16-year-old isn't here through a neglect story, right? Somebody took time and developed this kid. Okay, it's the same with leaders. When you find a leader that's developed, you're like, somewhere along this journey, somebody took time, or some group of leaders or some combinations of people took time. So I would just say leadership development really matters, and we don't do near enough of it. I love to have leaders get their pie chart out and see where they're putting their time, depending on your vocation. For ministry leaders, worship leaders, preachers, Sunday's always coming, right? Like the next sermon is going to be there, and there's going to be people sitting there waiting on content, right? And so it's always going to gravitate toward the 7-day cycle of Sundays coming, and I've got to get ready for that, and I've got to get everything going for that. I love to ask guys to do audits of their time and discover that they really are spending 98% of their time on Sunday, even if they're in a Soma church that's saying, hey, Sunday church is people, man, mission is every day. And I'm like, yeah, but your time and your money is like 99% leverage for Sunday. So you don't actually need that. And so I'll invite them to say, hey, what if your staff time and your hours and your money was actually leveraged like missional communities and small group mobilization, and we call them DNA groups, where 3 men with 3 men and 3 women with 3 women for discipleship, nurture, and accountability. And Sunday, what if you gave equal time and money to all 3 of those discipleship environments? Maybe some people have an equipping environment where they really are doing equipping and leadership development. What if you gave 25, 25 to those things with money and time? I bet your thing would feel way different. But right now you're in the Sunday cycle. So you're going to have a Sunday service. So I'll say it gently, but in a way, stop saying that like church is people and the mission is every day. If really for you, church is Sunday and we're just going to try to do it better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we're going to, so that's a big one. Audit what you're actually doing. And then look at what you want and then back up and build. But I was just say deep and wide. If the first thing on someone's dashboard should be in a ministry setting is prayer. Are you actually with Jesus personally? And are you guys with Jesus together? Corporate prayer is the highest leverage thing you could do. I think the second highest leverage thing you can do is leadership development. So you're on your dashboard, you have some way of measuring, are we deeper and wider than we were last year? Do we have more leaders and are they more formed? And when I see an organization that has more leaders and they're more formed than they were last year, I already know the future. And the future will be bright. And when I see a church that's doing nothing, they're using people and getting product and driving people that are already developed from somewhere other season in life, I'm like, man, some of these people are going to move away. Some of these people are things that you guys don't have a pipeline, you don't have a plan, So yeah, I just think that's something I spend a lot of time with guys on, is helping them really think about working on the church, not just in the church, building out the capacity. Is your capacity growing for the kingdom, or are you just trying to get more out of less? Are you Sunday? Are you every day? Latent potential we talked about earlier on the podcast. How much latent potential is sitting on a shelf in your church that's just untapped, or you're asking people to do things that are way less strategic than what you could be if you just backed up. It takes time. You have to get in front of it, right? You have to plan, and no one wants to spend the 6 months or 9 months doing the thing that you're not going to see any fruit from for 9 months, but it's the only way. It's like, and I'll talk to leaders that have been in a cycle for 6 years, 7 years of frustration. I'm like, when are you going to be frustrated enough to back up and build something better? Because you're just stuck in this week to week, and it's just going to be 7 more years of that. You know what I mean? And so I'll spend a lot of time on those kinds of things, trying to invite them to zoom out, think long term, build out capacity, that kind of thing.
And that's fun for leaders, though, once they start doing that and seeing the fruit and investing in people. I mean, I bet it's fun to watch those organizations, and that's not just a church deal, that's a business deal.
Yep.
I mean, what a good reminder to us in the business world as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very important.
People can grow and develop if you take time with them.
So a few more minutes, I wanted to ask you about just church planning. So you're involved in at least one church plant that I know of. From a know you're maybe more like, tell us what that really means, and when does it become a church plant?
Yeah.
Versus a gathering. Just talk a little bit about church planning.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are different schools of church planning. You could buy a book like Nelson Searcy's Launch, which is really launching a church service, and a whole 9 months of pre-launch is built around event management and marketing and getting kind of the pieces in place to plant a church service. I would say that Soma, and where I'm at, is much more would want to start with a group of disciples and make disciples and lead a few people to Christ and begin to disciple them, and then begin to develop a core that's making disciples that are reproducing. Because the goal is not to get transfer growth. It's not to get some people to leave the churches in town to come to your next new cooler thing, but to really make actual kingdom impact in the place where you're being sent. So to reach the people that aren't being reached, to make disciples amongst the people who are not being discipled already in other churches. And so you got to find, you need to start with Christians. Okay. So there is a gathering of Christians, and there's a gathering of a core that's committed and mature. You really want your core to be mature. You want these to be people who have the capacity to make disciples. And because what you're trying to do initially is model at almost like a fractal level, the thing that you want to see reproduced. And so you need a pretty pure version of it. And so you want your core to be, mature Christians who are committed to a new vision, that believe that there's places in the city that aren't reached, that they feel the Spirit has led them into, and they want to go after. And so you start forming them. There's a lot of different ways to do that, and there's no one size. But I think you're trying to live and obey. You're trying to make disciples. You're trying to do the fundamentals really well from the very beginning. And then a leader, as it does grow, we've talked about leadership development, but then it's like, okay, your missional community or your first discipleship community is really fruitful. Now, can you multiply it and coach another person to do that? And can you multiply that and coach now 4 people to do that? Can you do 8? Can you do 12? Can you build now you're starting to think about systems and structures, and you are starting to think about Sunday and what do you add when? And this is not like a business, it's not unlike a business leader is going, okay, we're in a growth trajectory, but there is timing about what you add when, and you think through the order, you think through what the capacity, you think through, you can cannibalize your volunteers by asking too much too fast. And so you're starting to actually I would say cannibalize. Like, hey, we had this thing that was pretty strong, but then we started pulling all those leaders over here and making them do this too. So this got weaker while this thing got a little bit stronger. And now we're doing this, weaker, stronger. And so instead of really building, they're like, this thing has to remain strong while we take this next step. Now these things will have to all remain strong while we take this next step. And so you're trying to build. A lot of it is discerning God and His Spirit and what He's doing. A lot of it is developing people. So much of it, one thing I do, if you talk about church planning, I think developing elders is so huge. Who are going to be the first 3 or 4 leaders, and then the next several leaders that are going to lead together in unity and diversity. A model church would be, Antioch, Acts 13. They had 5 prominent leaders leading together such that they could send Paul and Barnabas out and still be a strong, solid church that remained in Antioch. I think you got to look at how are we going to get to that Antioch, 5 leaders leading together in diverse gifts, in unity, really building. And so I'm always trying to get, one of the biggest things, is elder development. Who are going to be the key leaders in this church that are going to really own it? And then they're going to be developers and equippers of others. They're going to be leading spiritually. They're going to be exemplars, because the 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, those are pastoral epistles. They really teach you how to be the church. And the requirement for an elder is he's got to be a father. So he's a faithful father of his own family. To be a faithful father of God's family is kind of the law and the inherent logic of the entire job. And so, who are these fathering leaders? And their life, they're close connected to Jesus. They're models. They can say, like Paul, "Follow me as I follow Christ." They can develop others to advance the work into other places. Getting to that place, probably the biggest indicator for me with a church plant, whether it's going to make it or not, is can the lead pastor, the lead planter, move from him doing everything to him really raising up and I even see cruising altitude as, those 4 elders that are all really working in concert. And if you can't get there, if it's always the shopkeeper who's just doing everything, can't develop anybody living in the chronic short-term anxiety of week to week, it's a burnout zone, man. They just do it for 3 years or 4 years, and then they're just tired, and as they want to quit, or someone comes and helps them start to build that, right? And they realize, okay, I can't keep doing it this way, and that kind of thing. So I could go into a lot of sub disciplines of that, but that's a huge.
No, that's super helpful. Super, super helpful. Well, Duke, I want to ask you one more question and then I'm just grateful for your time and all the topics we covered. What are some personal routines you do that have really impacted your life that you would encourage somebody? And if you want to take a step in anything, try this. This is really a good routine that's helped you.
Yeah, you mean from a spiritual life or from a leadership standpoint, or both, or either?
Both and all, yeah.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think, having a set apart time to be with Jesus. I know that's so obvious and so simple, but figuring out how are you with Jesus, even having the distinction between having thoughts about Jesus versus thoughts with Jesus. So are you moving from knowledge to relationship, and which pathways are helping you move from knowledge to relationship with God? What things really connect? And I would say emotionally, because it's not just looking for an emotional experience, but relationship is inherently emotional. I think the core emotions reveal our need for relationship, and so they drive us into it. And so I would say, and I could get into this. You and I've talked a little bit about 10 man and some of what they do with the 8 core emotions. But one of the best things that's helped me move, and I could be a real cerebral guy, and I have been to seminary and read a lot, so I have a lot of thoughts about God. But to me, that's only, the demons have a lot of thoughts about God, right? But being with God, loving God, is a relational thing. And so the 8 core emotions and starting a day with those, I think it's what David's doing in the Psalms. So showing up and saying, God, I'm really hurt. Like that leader yesterday threw me under the bus in that meeting, and that just hurt. I'm a human. I feel, when someone does that, it hurts. And talking to God about the real stuff of your life is what David's doing in the Psalms. It's really the vibrancy of any relationship is, are you really showing up and telling the truth about yourself? And if we can do that with God, and I found those 8 emotions being the best pathways to write a psalm in the morning that's authentic to where I'm actually at, talking to God about it. And then you can do that with a few trusted others, which also is a really vital practice. I do that with my wife and a few other trusted men, where I can show up and be like, man, I'm really scared. I got to do this hard thing today at work. I'm not looking forward to it. I got anxiety about it. And I'm scared. Who can I tell that to? Because if I can do that work, then I can actually live relationally connected the ways that God made me with him and others. And I'm moving towards health, and so I think that practice of really showing up with God, showing up with a few others is really, really key. From a leadership standpoint, I mean, I'm pretty analog, but I fill up a moleskin and I have all kinds of, I don't know if I have the best memory. So I just have all kinds of ways of coming back and recording things and revisiting things, trying to think through what maybe it's a dashboard. I try to list, the 15 most important people in the season in terms of the work that I'm doing and how much time am I giving those people, and how much support am I giving those people? How much time am I praying for those people? So just I create systems and I change them all the time, but ways of dashboard is the best way for it. What am I looking at? How do I quantify what my work needs to look like in this season? And how do I create a dashboard that keeps bringing it up so that I'm looking at the right stuff? I mean, I literally have pictures of all the 15 most important people that I'm supposed to serve on my wall. So every time I look up from my computer, I could see them. I want to see those people and be like, and I'll track touches. Like, when's the last time I called those people? When's the last time I served those people? When's the last time I invested in those people? And I believe if those 15 people take a step like this year, our whole work takes a step. So I try to create dashboards, ways of, and a lot of times visuals. I could show you my wall. There's a lot of different mental models and visuals and dashboards and things that just help me to work on the right stuff. Because I think we've never been more distracted. We've got so many interruptions. We've got so many things that could pull us. And what brings us back to the core business of what we're called to in our vocation? What are the things that we do that move the needle? What are the things that only we can do? And then who are the people that do other things that are critical that we can support and mobilize and encourage, and that kind of thing. So, I mean, those are some of the things, but a lot of
that's great.
Parts of that as well.
That's super helpful. Well, so in order to connect with you and Soma, Duke also co-hosts a podcast called Saturate. Super good, and so we'll link everything to there. And then, where's the best place with the Soma to connect with Soma? Is there just a good website, or the Saturate the World? Are they different, or where do we go?
Yeah, they are different websites. wearesoma.com would be the Soma Family of Churches website. There are some things there. There's some trainings. Like if you were going to go to Soma school and go be a part of that training in a Soma church, you'd go to the We Are Soma website. SaturateTheWorld.com is going to be very broad. There is inspiration. There is equipping. There's all kinds of opportunities. There's a membership that's kind of like, gosh, I hate to say it, like Netflix for discipleship, but a lot of galleries of tons of videos. We've got videos of everyday disciples, housewives telling you how they're reaching the moms group for Jesus, lawyers, doctors, whoever. A lot of inspirational / equipping, a lot of training, free ebooks around like the Gospel Fluency Handbook or Saturate Every Day, which is really getting after how do you form disciples to make disciples in the everyday stuff of life. Tons of the podcast is free. As I mentioned, we've probably 110 episodes or so of the Saturate podcast on all kinds of things, kind of around all the stuff we've been talking about in this call or this time. And so those are places for sure. SaturateTheWorld.com and wearesoma.com.
That's so good, Duke. Well, thank you so much. What an honor, and so much we can get from this and learn. So we're grateful for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm looking forward to hopping on a 4-wheeler again with you in
I
Colorado.
know. We'll
Yeah.
do it. Hopefully this year.
Yeah.
Thanks, Duke.
Awesome.
Take care.
Yeah, we'll see y'all.
Hey, this is Micah. Me and Josh would like to thank you for joining us in the Storyfield today. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and to learn more about us and the Storyfield, visit thestoryfield.com. This podcast is sponsored by the Allen Firm, legal guides for many of life's situations. To learn more about the Allen Firm, visit allenlawfirm.com. Have a blessed day, week, and year, and we will see you next time on the Storyfield.